This is a site that's owned by a family, the Ziegler family, and it's called the Ziegler Reservoir now. And they own this land up in the Colorado Rockies. It's about almost 9,000 feet. The owner, it originally was, when they got there, was just a meadow. But the owner thought, I want to build a dam here. We can dam this up and I can just go out my back door and go trout fishing anytime I want. So they did. But it wasn't deep enough. And so eventually they said, and apparently they got plenty of money, they said, well, okay, they hired a construction company and they drained that reservoir and they started digging this out. And the contractors and their big shovels and their bulldozers and so forth started hitting solid objects, and they get out and this is a big mammoth tusk. Boy, maybe, and so they ended up getting in touch with the Denver Museum of Science and Nature. And so they sent a team of people up there, and meanwhile they were continuing to start digging, because they were making it, and not only were going to make the dam higher, but they were going to dig down so it's deeper as well. So they kept hitting more and more bones. And so the contractor, I can almost not imagine this happening, saying, I'll give you 5 months or 6 months to dig it out, and then we're going to flood it, and we're going to finish it. So the museum sent a team up there, and so here's what they started finding. I mean, huge mammoth tusks, or mastodon tusks, one or the other. I'm not sure in this case which, but they found both. So what does the site look like? Well, that's an aerial view of the site. And this whole basin is 39 acres in size. And just to give you some scale here, those are people. There's big giant shovels and big bulldozers and huge trucks. And so this very much complicates the thing, because they started digging in different places and going through different ages of sediment. How do you put all this together? And so that's how it was discovered and how the excavation started. So they put together a team. They invited a team of 40 scientists. I think the last note, there are now 49 of us, to come and work on the site, every aspect of the site, the geology, what lived in the lake, how did the sediment get there, all this sort of stuff. And so this is a fair size part of the team. Unfortunately, for Holmes, I couldn't get everybody in this PowerPoint shot, but Russ Graham is right over there. He's a former student, PhD student of Holmes's. My colleague and former student, Laura Strickland, is here, but this is a whole team. This is the team that, and I'm back there looking goofy, this is the team that worked on it then. So let's take a look then at how the site formed in the first place. This is a drawing of, there's Snowmass Village down here, Brush Creek, Snowmass Creek. There's Ziegler Reservoir on the top of this ridge. How do you get a lake on top of a ridge? I'd never seen one before. So they did a fair amount of work on that, and this is the first slide that I'll show you kind of the stages in this, but in this case, there are two valley glaciers coming down this valley, and this is in what they call the Bull Lake glaciation, which is 130,000 years old. What we call the Wisconsin in the Midwest. And these two merged, and it just sort of peeked over the edge here. Now, in order to explain that a little better, I put on a drawing of a glacier, and just very quickly, here's a valley glacier up in the mountains. In the winter, it gets snow all over the place. And during the summer, it's warmer down here, so the snow starts to melt. The surface snow starts melting and melting and melting, but it doesn't all melt away. And so if the glacier is advancing, that means that there's more accumulating than melting, and the whole glacier, well, it's always moving, but the glacier moves down valley, and the front of the glacier moves down valley. What about when the glacier retreats? Does it turn around and flow back up valley? No. Simply, melting is greater than accumulation. And so the front melts back, and so the front of the glacier retreats. The glacier is still flowing all the time. You can see it's carrying all kinds of rock and stuff like that. What about when those two are equal? And that seems to have been the case for extended periods, just about the same amount of accumulation and melting. So it's still flowing, but the front is stationary, and it forms you a moraine. That's what we have in, this site. Let's see if I can do this now. I'm going to go back one. And it just peaked around just over the edge there, and so there's a little moraine circling that lake. All right, so after that, the lake glaciers melted. The interglacial, the Sangamon interglacial time, when it was warm like today, and that lake sat there. And much later, 21,000 years ago, the next glacier came down, called the Pinedale Glacier out there, but it didn't get as high. So that lake sat there for, what, 130,000 years. All right, so let's just kind of take a look at the cross-section of the edge of the glacier. And so 130,000 years ago, it was full of ice. 128,000 years ago, by that time, most of that ice had melted out. And you started getting lake sediments in the basin. 120,000 years ago, 10 or 8,000 years later. Then some big animals started living around there, mammoths, mastodons, whatever. And the lake has been getting sediment, but one other thing has started to happen. This moraine is very steep, and so you get rock slides down the side. Some of those rock slides then went out into the basin, and whether they actually killed the animals as they were standing there, or simply carried dead animal bones down, whatever, they got there out in the lake. That's what a rock slide looks like. You can see sort of bouldery stuff. There's very highly oxidized chunks in here, but a lot of clay and silt as well. And so those things came into the lake. And 70,000 years ago, at that time, the lake was essentially sort of full. And peat started to form, started to be a big bog or fen or whatever. And the lakes, this is all lake sediment. This yellow band here was kind of interesting because it was probably a time when the lake was very shallow, and so the sediment, surface sediment oxidized. It's only a thin band like that. But it's very useful because it formed all the way across the lake, and so it ties all these different places together pretty well, and it's 100,000 years old. And I love the name that they gave it. They called it the Yellow Brick Road. So 50,000 years ago, well, water levels rose again and some more lake sediment formed, and 60 years ago it was a meadow. And that's when these folks said, you know, if we dam this up, we can make a lake there. But I don't think they had any idea that those are all lake beds down below. Another item here, I guess, is that how did the lake sediment get there? Because this is a very small drainage basin. And so the geologists have pretty well concluded that a lot of the sediment is blown in from the wind and deposited in the water, and because that's the only way you can get sediment up there. All right, so 1958, there's the small dam that he built. But 2011, you can see they've deepened it. They put a much larger dam, and that's what I showed you in the second picture there. That's what it looks like with that dam in place. And it's been in place now for over a year. So it's pretty, it's a very unusual lake to be sure. This is what some of the sediment looks like, pretty gooey looking stuff. And there's the volunteer group mostly from the Denver Museum of Science and Nature. And it turns out, I didn't know this, but they have a huge volunteer group that will go out anywhere in the West and dig dinosaurs and dig whatever they're doing. And so oftentimes there'll be 30 or 40 volunteer people there digging along, and oh, boom, there's a bone here, and then you get the bone out. And so that was the crew that was there with the day that one of the days that I was there, and there's some of the discoveries that they were making that day, big bones, and I think probably a log over here. Another view of how many bones there are, and so let's take a look at what animals they found then. So this is mastodon jaw, lower jaw, and I think I can safely say with Professor Semken, the expert here, that mastodons were browsers, and so their teeth, all right, they look pretty big, but they're actually not very high crowned, and they're evolved for chewing sort of soft materials. And so there's not the bones just from this, not from this site, but here is a mastodon skeleton, and there's what the animal looked like. So this is one of the big animals. And I think, I don't have the exact figures in my head right now, but there are something like 10 mastodons, 15 mammoths. I mean, this is an incredible number of large animals. So they called it the Snowmastodon site, which I think is another cute name. They seem to have a lot of cute names with the Denver Museum. And so here's a mammoth tooth then. Mammoths were grass eaters. Grass have little silica bodies in them, and if you don't have a big thick tooth, you're going to not have many teeth left. So this is what a skeleton of the mammoth looks like, and the animal itself. So that's two huge animals. Now I just paint this picture. Well, I'll do a couple more first, I guess. So here's one of the really interesting aspects of this. This is, they found this one mammoth, the youngest one, out in the middle of the lake. And the carcass was whole, and it was filled with these very large boulders in the stomach cavity. Now, I can tell you that mammoths don't eat rock. So how do they get there? One way you might postulate it'd be that maybe the mammoth wandered out in the ice in the wintertime and died, and then a rock slide came in and filled it up. The only one problem with that is that there aren't any rocks between that and the shoreline. It's just those rocks out in the middle of the lake. So that doesn't make very good sense. Well, when this carcass got back in the lab, Dan Fisher, expert from Michigan State, is that correct, Holmes? Took a look at some of the bones, and as he was looking, he found one rib bone, and it had a bunch of parallel markings on it. And he took one look at that and said, those are cut marks. That is, cut marks by humans on a bone. There's only one problem with that. Most archaeologists for many years said there weren't any people here before maybe 12,000 years ago. They found a few older sites now, maybe, I don't know, it was John around 20,000, something like that.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. This is over 50,000 years old. So, I was very interested to see the group when the whole group got together in Denver last summer to talk about all the different aspects that people were studying. Dan Fisher and one or two others were adamant that these are cut marks. On the other hand, Russ Graham and several other people say, those can't possibly be. There's not cut marks. I don't think they're ever, if they are even, they're ever going to find any human remains there, but it's an interesting problem, an interesting thought that maybe humans were there that early. I mean, we find, you know, archaeological sites all over the country, but they're at the surface. You know, you bury them beneath the last glacial stuff. No wonder, if they're there, no wonder people haven't found them. So anyway, this just makes it a little more interesting, I think. Okay, then that big bone, and these guys should be familiar to you from Iowa Hall. There's the giant ground sloth, and I had to go over for a short time this afternoon to say hi to Rusty, but give my regards from this one. So now maybe this is a good time as any to think about this. Can you, I mean, what do you think of when you think of elephants in modern elephants today as to where they live? I mean, you think about them out in the plains of Africa, right? And what in the world are they doing at 9,000 feet in steep glacial terrain at the top of this hill? They got up there somehow. But, I mean, that's one of the enigmas of the site, is that, wow, this doesn't make sense. How do they get there? And the ground sloth's particularly a slow, creepy crawler. He got there. And then one more big guy. There's the unearthing of this guy, the giant bison. Now another one of those extinctions. A bunch of smaller bones and from the deer. I think these are teeth. Holmes, you can correct me if they're not. Of camel.
Is this from the same site?
Yes, all of these are at this site. Yeah, I mean that's what's so incredible is this big game site. And then there's early horse. So yeah, there's this, well, this is the group of enormous creatures that were all living around this lake and got trapped in the sediment. I don't think anybody has a good idea of, I mean, there was a NOVA program on this, and that NOVA program was entitled Ice Age Death Trap. And, you know, how they got there, how they got preserved, what were they doing out in the lake, how did they get out in the lake? There's still a lot of questions about that, and a lot of very smart people working on it, so maybe they'll come up with some ideas. But then some of the evidence isn't just for bones either. There's some nice beaver gnawed wood there. Lots of little tiny bones as well. Sorry, what?
She said no human bone.
Oh, no, No human bones.
And those are big beavers or little beavers?
Little beavers, I believe. So, and so some of the other, here, there were lots of fossil insects. This is a beetle wing there. And there's people working on fossil beetles at the site. So here's an assemblage of smaller animals that they think are present at the site. And I can't name them all, but a couple of ducks and geese and maybe weasels and snakes and frogs and salamanders or whatever. So quite an array of smaller animals as well. So, as I said, these are a lot older than anything they originally thought they could be, but it's older than radiocarbon dating, so it's very difficult to get dates on these. But they've used optical, yes, yeah, and it isn't as accurate in a sense, but here it shows you the top of the unit is little between 40 and 60,000, and a nice progression down to the bottom, which is close to 140,000. So that's pretty much indicating that the lake sediments were formed during that interval.
They dug down that far?
No.
The what?
They did.
Yeah, this is the bottom of the sediment record. Below this, it's moraine, and we know that glacier reaches maximum about 140,000 years ago. So,
But they didn't dig down that far.
oh, they did dig down to the bottom, yeah. And in addition to digging, they took some cores to the bottom. So they have gone to the bottom. Yep. Well, there's some plant materials there, and we didn't work on this particular group, but these are little spruce cones. Look very much like subalpine, or the Engelmann spruce today. And there's wood, some pretty sizable chunk of wood there, so somebody's working on tree rings to see if they can see any trends in the tree rings that can be fit into the lake sediment record. And then they did take a core, and they cored right from top to bottom. And the reason they did that was severalfold, because there's a bunch of things living in the lake, but also some other colleagues worked on pollen grains from the lake. And so here's some of the common types they found: fir, spruce, pine, and then there's some herbs and an aquatic plant here, and bog plant there, so a fern, and there's a few more, mostly herbaceous species here. So there's a fairly good sequence of pollen, which I didn't see until quite recently. So now, let's see, where am I here? Yeah, okay.
So are they preserving this? I mean, in other words, the family that has it, do they want to return it to a...
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting point. There was a discussion about, this is such an important site, let's not flood it all, let's just leave it as it is. And several of the geologists said, that's not a good idea, because things are there because they've been buried and under the water table for a long time. If you leave these out, they're going to oxidize and decay, and you won't have them. But the contractors did apparently say, at least word of mouth anyway, that if we need to get back in there, they'll drain it again and they can go dig some more. I don't know. Okay, so this is from a paper that by Laura and myself, and which she did a wonderful job. And so I'm going to be showing you some of the plant things here, and here's Laura, and here's one of the sites that we sampled. There's our sampling, and we chose particularly to get next to the edge. We did look early on at some sediments from right out in the middle of the lake, and they did have seeds in them, but they were all aquatic plants. So we didn't learn anything about what was growing around there. So we went next to the edge, and so a couple of other views of the site, and you can see all the dirt that's been moved and all this sort of stuff. And we're basically not in what is now kind of an aspen fir forest parkland. You'll see some more pictures of that. There's some more aspen up there. That's what's growing there today. And here's a big trench that they call the Twisty Trench that they dug, and we took some samples from. And there's the dam as it was when we were out there. So
One other question. Is the present day excavate reservoir, is it the same size coincidentally as the original natural lake?
yes, pretty much, yeah. Yep. Yeah, because it's such a small basin, and once you fill it with water, it's.
Were there other university people from other universities involved?
Oh yes,
I
yep.
was just wondering how the University of Iowa got involved, but there were other universities.
Well, they picked people for their expertise in various aspects of what they were studying. And my career, I've studied fossil seeds and leaves, and what we call macro fossils, because they're Laura and I were chosen to work on this. I also had worked out in the Rocky Mountains, and she's in Denver, so we were familiar with that. So they chose us. They chose one of the vertebrate people from Penn State, for example, who worked on elephants and stuff. And so they chose them just on the basis of they wanted to get people that would know what they're doing. And I think I've got them fooled for most of the time. So here's some of the lake sediments that, as you can see, if you let it sit out, they're going to get all cracked up and everything. And that's one of the places where they dug, I think, right down to the bottom. So just a brief thing on macrofossils as opposed to why are they useful or great? First of all, you can see them. They're easy to pick up and process. Easy to process. Pollen, you have to go through an extensive, terrible chemical procedure to get it out. You just wash these through a screen and pick them out. They're often identifiable to the species level. You can almost never identify pollen at the species level. In fact, a lot of it, grass pollen, for example, can only be identified as the family, the grass family. Well, gee, grasses grow everywhere. I mean, what does that tell you? Typically, they don't travel very long distance from their source either. Pollen, you can get pollen blowing in for hundreds of miles sometimes. The problems, lakes usually don't have real rich fossils, especially in the deeper parts, because stuff falls in the water, and if it's going to sink, it probably sinks near shore. And aquatic and wetland plants are well represented, but oftentimes upland plants are not, and that was pretty much the case with us. So, another view of the lakes and so forth. And so here's a sort of a summary diagram showing the edge of the lake, like we saw in the earlier part of the talk, and with some of these debris flows. I think there are at least 4 coming into the lake. Here's right down to the bottom, and this is the rock that the lake formed on top of, the moraine, basically. There's the yellow brick road. There's peat samples up here, and there was a mastodon, almost an entire mastodon in the peat. And I think we all kind of imagined once the lake dried up to a certain point and then peat started forming, that the poor guy probably started going out into the middle of the peat, got stuck there and couldn't get out. it's a theory anyway. And then this is the mammoth that had the bone, the stones and supposed cut marks in it. So that sort of summarizes that. And here's, just to give you an example, here's 4 or 5 different sections that were sampled in various places, and there's some of these places for, so I won't back up, but each one of these refers to one of those sections that I just showed you. And sometimes you can, like the peat had a lot of spruce in it, so wherever that was found, we knew that was the same. All right, so now, how does this fit in with other long-term records of climate? And so here's basically the record. Well, there are 2 sources of records like this. One is the marine record, where you just think about the ocean. It's been getting sediments all through thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, and so if you core those, well, you get a real, oftentimes a real complete record, and that's the marine isotope record. And the other place where you can do that is places like Greenland and Antarctica. You can get an ice core, and again, year by year, almost record of changes. And so this shows you the amount of methane in green here, and the amount of carbon dioxide. Both of those, you may have heard, are greenhouse gases, and the temperatures that are deduced from these. So when methane is high and carbon dioxide is high, it's warm. When it's low, it's cold. Pretty simple. Now, let's see here.
How far back would the ice cores go? You know?
Right here, 800,000.
800,000. Yeah.
Antarctica, 800,000.
Yeah, that's the Antarctic ice cores. Yeah, so there then is the Ziegler reservoir record and how it fits in. So we knew that it certainly included some interglacial time near the bottom here, and that it did get quite chilly up towards the top. And you can, I think eventually we'll be able to tie in which animals were growing in the cold times and which, but at least I don't know that story well enough yet. Let's see, is there, yeah. So cold, warm, cold, warm, cold, warm, but going back 800,000 years. So, okay, and there's Ziegler. So, here is the record of pollen, which I'm, and here is the marine isotope record, records here in MIS, marine isotope. 5 is considered to be interglacial, last interglacial, 6 is previous glacial, and 4, I guess it would be the beginning of the cold period, later cold period. And I'm not going to go into detail except 2 or 3 things to point out, I guess. One is, from top to bottom, that AP means arboreal pollen or tree pollen. And you can see that it's low at the top here, and then it kind of goes up, and there's this slightly cool period here, and then it's high, and then it's cold. It's very few trees at the bottom. A couple of other things. Spruce is also fairly high during the warmer times, and oak. Now, oak is certainly a sort of a lower, it would be Gamble's oak, but it's certainly a lower elevation plant, and it's sort of curious that it's not too high up there, but certainly very high during this part of the warm period here, and then very low down when it's really cold. And the last one is sagebrush, of all things. And it's high in the cold period, low in the warm period. And sagebrush, since you consider all this sediment in the lake have blown in, probably the sagebrush pollen blew in at a time when nothing else was producing much pollen. In other words, when it was very cold, local production was low, and so you get higher percentage of this stuff that's blowing in from a distance. So anyway, I don't want to bore you too much with more than that. And then here's the macrofossil record, which I admit is a minor part of this whole thing. And here's a bunch of different aquatic plants up here, and you can see they're pretty much present throughout, certainly more abundant up in the cold parts. The deciduous trees and shrubs, boy, not any of them up here. So this must have been right here, sort of the warm period based on the macrofossils. Herbs, well, kind of warm, most abundant in that same period, and conifers sort of scattered throughout. So I'll go quickly through some of the, let's see, come on. Time to change, come on. Oops, oh, okay. Yeah. So here's it's cooler than present, warmer than present, and question mark. So a quick rundown on some of the plants that we have seen and some of their seeds. And so here's a pondweed, aquatic plant. Oh, shoot, I got a back one again. Common all over the place. Bog bean, beautiful seed here, and it's a kind of a wet ground plant. Bulrush, well, that's pretty common. In most places, we've got some growing in our place. Here's some of the trees, Engelmann and blue spruce. And there's a cone of, I think it's a fir cone scale, and Douglas fir. Aspen, we see most of it from in aspen actually are the buds. They have very distinctive buds. A choke cherry, for goodness sake. I guess the mammoth, mastodons had to be eating something. And raspberries, red raspberries. There's a seed of those. There's dogwood, red osier dogwood. That grows around here, all over the place. Birch and hawthorn. This is a shrub with very big thorns and stuff. I've got all kinds of that on my place out in the country. So some of them are quite common. Pigweed, a weedy plant, grasses, little violets. We couldn't tell what species, but the best match was one that grew in wet grounds. One called cinquefoil. There's vervain, which is another very common one around here, and stinging nettle. Oh boy, guess they got stung too. That's been going around for a long time. So this is the view then of the aspen forest here, and you also get a kind of a view of the zones of vegetation. And this is the lower zone, and it's growing around the lake today, and there's gamble oak, this brownish stuff, aspen. And so if we kind of trace the artist's conception of the evolution of this pond, probably Bull Lake glaciation, there's the ice in there, formed a moraine here around here, and then at 128,000 years ago, when it was still, then you had giant ground sloths and giant bison and mammoths, and then still later, 70,000, you've got these big guys, a few other, and then during the last glaciation, probably had the whole thing frozen the whole time, but the ice didn't get up high enough, and so it wasn't getting any sediment during that time, or it was filled with sediment, probably more accurately. And then there's what it looks like today, and since the museum people noticed this bear wandering around when they were out there, they thought it appropriate to put the bear in this. So that is my story, and I just have had such fun working on it. So thanks for the patience to listen to it. And I'll answer questions if I can. Yes, sir.
Did you ever find any fecal lists or anything like that with the animals?
Any which?
Fecal lists.
Oh, vital lists, you mean? I think someone is working on the vital lists, but I haven't gotten. One of the frustrating things for most of the time I've been working on it is there's very little, interactions between all those 49 people or however many it is. So I don't know what they found.
Yeah, you need a symposium in a nice place.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, I could go for that. Yes, Mike?
Fire, charcoal?
Didn't see any hint of any fire in the record. No, that doesn't, I mean, I was only out there for a couple of days, and I didn't see any other reports of it either. So that's an interesting question, because there's, forest fires are natural occurrences, and you'd think they might have left some charcoal in the record. On the other hand, if it were far enough away and you might not actually see it in the record if it was just a few little bits of charcoal. So yeah, you might have to have it right at the lake to be able to see very much of it. Yeah.
There was no, I have the impression there was no evidence in the area of early humans living there at all.
Well, you see, it's supposedly way before, when the lake was there, it was way before anybody had any thought that humans were around. And this very controversial finding doesn't prove they were there, but they probably, the earliest that you could say for sure is that I don't know, I haven't kept up to date on this, but maybe 22,000 one?
Those are controversial. So
Yeah, they're all controversial, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, John.
So what is the evidence for the 50K date on the Mastodon with the?
It was in the uppermost part of the lake silt, and it has optical dates on that of 40, is it, I don't know, around 50,000 something.
Not a
When you
direct
say
estimate.
optical, do you mean geological?
Well,
The geology of the site?
it's a measurement of what? Help me out, Ron. Optical dating. It's the I don't recall the details of it, but
for Jeff, it's the
Jeff.
mineral,
Okay, Jeff.
displaced by trapped in glass sites.
It's mostly done on the mineral quartz, and it's just the quartz accumulates a dose
And so it's
from exposure to sunlight.
so it's the last time that
Accumulates over time.
sunlight hit that piece of quartz, presumably. Is that right? Or?
So the reason for the other dating methods is that it's highly inaccurate, or?
No, it's older than radiocarbon. Only goes back about 40,000 years because the carbon is all used up by then. There's none left. It's decayed to nothing by then. So that's good for everything younger. But that's what everyone thought we'd be getting is lots of radiocarbon days. Well, whoops, we didn't.
But what were the bones of the animal itself? Can they not be dated?
Probably not.
Really?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. Yes,
So
Bob.
the story with the mammoth skeleton and rocks out in the middle of the lake.
Yeah. Well,
Was it thought that those rocks were put inside
Yes,
that
yes.
carcass? and
yeah.
put down?
As I am told by the folks that worked on this, that this was actually a method used by early Native Americans. If they got a big carcass and the meat wasn't going to be, you couldn't keep it, they would put rocks in it and bury it in a cold water lake. And so these guys that were working on the site tried that. They butchered a cow or a buffalo or something, I don't even know, a couple of different animals, stuffed them with rock and put them in a cold, deep water lake, and came back 6 months later or something like that, and brought them up, and there was a little layer like this that was slightly, they decided, not to eat that layer, but the rest of the carcass was in perfect shape, very edible. And so it has been used that way. Now, how do you get a heavy carcass with stones inside of it out there? Well, I guess one thing is you could do it in the winter. I mean, you could stuff them in the winter and carry it out on the ice and let it sit there till it sinks. And, yeah.
Any idea what the depth of the lake was at that point?
Boy, I should know this too. I think it's, I'm sort of guessing here, I think it's like 60, 70 feet, probably something. I mean, it was a considerable depth. Yeah. It's like a lot of these last glacial marine dam lakes in the Rockies. They're quite deep, and the water's really beautifully clear, and trout love them and all this good stuff. So.
What was the age of the carcass with the big rocks?
That was the one that should be close to 50,000. Yeah.
50?
Yeah.
And they're saying people did that?
Well, that's one hypothesis, but there
I
are.
couldn't think of any other reason.
Well, can you? I mean, it's difficult to explain.
Well, maybe they did like to eat rocks.
No, I don't think that's I don't accept that one, I'm sorry. But I don't know if there'll ever be a satisfactory explanation. And it's one of these conundrums that scientists can't solve all the problems, and without further evidence, maybe if they'll find an arrowhead next time they open it up. Well, I doubt it, but yes.
So because that rock-filled animal was
Yeah.
suggested evidence that people were there 50,000 years, which is 30,000 years earlier than
Yes.
we supposed.
Right.
Is that evidence, is that enough to
Well, that.
support, is that one piece of evidence enough to support like anthropologists now getting
Oh.
funding to go do lots of stuff around that area to try and support that? Or is that just like, oh, it's a pretty thing, huh?
Yes. I mean, there's the rocks, but there's also the cut marks, and if you accept those for being real, then maybe you want to believe that there were people there. And
So, but is that enough though for I presume there's anthropologists working on
I think anthropologists and geologists, for that matter, would like more information to say yes.
So that's like a starting point to
That's
do a
it.
whole new study of the area of people.
There's our state archaeologist. What do you think, John?
You can make a pitch for grant money with that. Not all funding agencies would want to take that risk, but it's tantalizing. I presume somebody's working on the cut mark still, because you said something very distinctive. You said, at first glance, you said, that's a cut mark.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's, using an SEM microscope, there's lots of research
Yeah.
done on cut marks, on different kinds of bone.
And I haven't heard
to
if
compare to it. So
Yeah.
somebody needs to be doing that kind of level of study. Once that gets published, okay, then let's
Yeah.
talk. But on
And-
the level of the communication that's existing
Yeah.
so far, no, nobody's going to fund that. But
Yeah.
it is tantalizing.
How about saber-toothed tigers cut marks?
There are lots of things that make scratches on bones.
Yeah, but probably not a series of parallel scratches. I think that's one thing. I mean, yeah, saber-tooth might make a scratch, but a whole series of parallel, but yeah, they would have two slices, right? Yeah, but I'm just willing to think it's interesting, and I don't think I know. What would you study to look for that? I mean, you could dig all the sediments around in the lake if you drained it, I suppose, but pretty unlikely that you're going to find evidence, human evidence even doing that. And furthermore, if you're looking for something that's of that age, most of the landscapes were since then altered by the subsequent glaciation. So where do we even find something to look for in that?
You got smarter people than me.
Yeah, Mike.
How special is this site? Is there more possibilities for that kind of site in the area?
No, that's the only spot, that lake. There's no other lake anywhere in the Rockies that I know of, anywhere. I mean, it is really, as my wife hates it when she hears this, it's very unique.
Yeah. Is there any volcanic ash integrated within the sediment? Any evidence of that?
No, I don't think so. Not, but again, the group doesn't correspond very well with one another, and there's certainly, there are a couple other things. There's going to, I think, be a book on all this, and I think we've got until August or something like that to get each of us to get our parts written up. And there's also maybe going to be one volume of a journal just on this topic. And so there will be more out. They're still working on it. I don't know if they're going to, doing it as you suggested or not, but I hope so.
Yeah.
But you got to admit, it's a pretty amazing site. Yes.
9,000 feet is pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine elephants and stuff up 9,000 feet, especially in extremely steep terrain, but they were there.
With respect to macrofossils for plants,
Yeah.
how far back have you got data for that?
Well, you mean Intersite?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a,
Like how much of the entire depth
Yeah.
do you have in macrofossil evidence?
yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. My colleague at Denver is the one who's got all the samples. She just sends some to me and says, what's in these samples? And so I've got a minor, even more of a minor part of this, but I think that we've certainly sampled much of it. I can't believe that we haven't sampled just about all of it, but I just can't say that for certain. I think we've done it top to bottom.
Was the ephedra yours?
No, that was Pollen,
Right.
and the ephedra is a southwest desert plant, and it's well known for blowing all over the place, and in fact, when I used to do pollen work, I have found ephedra in the Midwest, and it didn't ever live here. I mean, it blew away from southwest deserts to here, so it gets around a lot. Well, thank you all again for coming, and thanks.